I couldn't believe my eyes. Another package vanished. She smirked, calling it free stuff, while the gate camera blinked red. Glitter burst everywhere, catching her off guard on every frame. "Let me take you back." The first clue came on a late afternoon when I realized my package from the local grocery delivery hadn't arrived. I stepped onto the cul-de-sac, squinting against the sharp spring sunlight of Scottsdale, Arizona. The air was dry, tinged with mesquite smoke from someone's weekend BBQ, and the HOA manicured lawns gleamed in perfect geometric order. Yet, perfection can be deceiving. Karen Halbrook, standing by her polished black SUV, waved casually and said, "Oh, that's probably just free stuff left out for anyone to take." Her voice carried that faintly dismissive lilt she always used when speaking down to anyone who dared notice her small transgressions. It hit me. Then someone had gone through my deliveries, my things. Right here, under the very noses of the community. I tried to swallow my irritation. As a retired claims adjuster, I'd seen plenty of thefts, frauds, and small-town disputes masquerading as harmless neighborhood squabbles. Still, it never got easier watching your private property vanish, especially in plain sight. Karen's smirk didn't help. I noted how she seemed almost proud, as though the cul-de-sac itself granted her some unsanctioned authority. The HOA board had always sided with appearances over substance, and today felt like a test of that bias. I walked toward the HOA office, passing the neat rows of desert-adapted shrubs, and spotted the board member, Mr. Daniels, reviewing some papers at a folding table. "Karen says my package was taken." I began, trying to keep my tone measured. "Is there any way to check the camera?" His brow furrowed briefly before settling into that familiar stiffness that made me think of old courtroom witnesses reciting bylaws from memory. "Without proof, Mr. Brandt, we can't intervene," he said flatly. His attention drifted back to the spreadsheet of violation notices and upcoming assessments, leaving me to digest the answer. No help here, only procedure. I returned to my driveway, fists loosely clenched, eyes scanning for anything unusual. That's when I noticed it, my mailbox, shiny and undisturbed, nestled between two hibiscus bushes. No scratches, no pried locks. For a moment, it served as a strange anchor of normalcy in a situation otherwise fraying. I pulled the certified letter I'd been meaning to mail into the glove compartment, the paper trembling slightly in my hand as my pulse quickened. The scent of mesquite smoke from Karen's nearby patio drifted over, oddly comforting yet infuriating, a reminder of her oblivious enjoyment while my peace had been invaded. Feeling a surge of indignation, I headed back toward her driveway. Karen leaned against the side of her SUV, arms crossed, and the sunlight glinted off her polished wristwatch. "I told you," she said again, that smug cadence threading her words. "Probably just free stuff." Her eyes flicked toward my direction with that perfectly rehearsed mixture of innocence and superiority. Neighbors passing by slowed their steps, casting curious glances. The tension hung in the late afternoon air, heavy and aromatic, punctuated only by the faint hiss of a distant sprinkling system. I cleared my throat. "Karen, this isn't a joke. My package didn't walk itself into your yard." Her smirk widened ever so slightly. "Well, maybe it wanted to," she replied lightly, shrugging. Laughter bubbled from a couple of residents nearby, but it felt cruel, a mockery of the quiet peace I'd cherished. My stomach twisted, not with hunger, but with the sense that trust, so painstakingly built over years of neighborly civility, had been eroded in one casual, dismissive sentence. I turned back toward my own house, heart still pounding. That's when I noticed it, the red light atop the HOA gate, blinking faintly, almost imperceptibly. My first instinct had been to ignore it. Most residents didn't pay attention to security cameras unless there was an obvious problem. But this time, the small repetitive flash felt like a warning, a secret signal that the cul-de-sac itself had recorded the truth. A sudden flicker of hope mingled with apprehension. Perhaps I wasn't entirely powerless after all. Walking back, I replayed the moment with Karen in my mind, her effortless veneer, the casual arrogance. My eyes lingered on the mailbox again now, more than just a prop. It represented order, stability, and the silent assertion that not everything in this neighborhood could be taken without consequence. Somewhere behind the smirk and the black SUV lay a vulnerability that no one else seemed to notice. My pulse slowed slightly as I imagined reviewing the camera feed, the potential proof tucked somewhere in digital memory, waiting to be unearthed. I set the certified letter on the kitchen counter and ran a finger along the creased envelope. Small actions, meaningless to some, had always grounded me. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, and the ever-present scent of the desert air filtering through the window reminded me of what I had to lose and what I might regain. For a moment, I allowed myself to think about the bigger picture, the rules of the HOA, the carefully constructed facades of the neighbors, and the fragile peace we all maintained like delicate glass. Karen's free stuff comment wasn't just a taunt, it was a challenge, an invitation to expose the hypocrisy that hid behind manicured lawns and polite nods at board meetings. I could feel the stirrings of resolve within me, a spark of the careful, measured approach I had relied on for decades in claims adjustment. It wouldn't be easy, but the path forward was there. As the evening sun cast long shadows across the cul-de-sac, I stepped outside once more. The red light of the HOA gate blinked again, steady this time, as though affirming that the story had begun, recorded, undeniable, and ready to be acted upon. I could almost hear the camera's silent witness in the hush of the late afternoon, a first line of evidence, the beginning of a confrontation I had no choice but to pursue. And then it hit me. If the camera had captured Karen's smirk, her dismissive words, maybe I had more than suspicion. I had proof. The sense of fragile peace that morning had been shattered, but from that fracture emerged a direction, a course that demanded careful steps and unwavering observation. I couldn't yet see the full story, but I knew the first pieces were aligned and the next move would be mine. By summer 2018, the cul-de-sac seemed to chatter in code. Whispers traveled faster than the HOA newsletters ever could, curling around palm fronds and bouncing off the crisp white fencing around the pool. The scent of chlorine clung to the air, mingling with the dry heat of mid-July and the incessant buzz of cicadas hidden in the mesquite trees. I tried to focus, but every sideways glance from a neighbor felt loaded. Small talk wasn't innocent here, it was a weapon. The poolside meeting had begun with polite applause for the HOA board, yet under the veneer of civility tension rippled. Flyers taped to the chain-link fence announced upcoming assessments and delivery liability clauses, their corners curling slightly in the dry heat. I scanned the group, noting Karen's posture. She leaned casually against the railing. Bright hair pulled back, her smile effortless. Every word she uttered, soft jokes about Amazon Santa and the quirks of summer deliveries, felt like a pin pressed into the fragile balloon of my credibility. Wallace Brandt. I kept counting my own ticks, cataloging every odd glance, every subtle smirk aimed my way. Neighbors murmured shifting feet on the deck, the squeak of sandals against concrete amplifying the tension. The HOA treasurer, Mr. Hargrove, stepped up to discuss a new clause that would in essence absolve anyone from liability if packages went missing. I could feel the room's energy tilt against me, the unspoken verdict settling like dust in the sunlight. I had tried patience, I had tried subtlety, but the helpless anger burned hotter each day. Still, there was a faint glimmer of hope. Back at my home office, I had replayed the security gate footage countless times. One blurry figure, the shadow of someone bending down near my driveway, flickered across the monitor. Not clear enough for conviction, but enough to remind me that the truth might exist somewhere just beyond reach. That single frame became my talisman, proof that I hadn't imagined Karen's interference. As the HOA president droned on about bylaws, I subtly maneuvered my laptop toward the projector, hoping to show a snippet of the footage. The projector hummed to life, the image stretching across the whiteboard screen, and then it died soft, click, abrupt black. I checked cables, tugged gently at the connection, but the moment had passed. A collective sigh rose from the crowd, masking my frustration in polite murmurs. I could almost hear Karen's quiet, victorious chuckle behind her hand as she whispered to a neighbor. I shifted in my chair, aware that my heartbeat had picked up. Was it paranoia, or had someone truly tampered with the setup? I reminded myself to stick to evidence, not conjecture, but the sting of helplessness was unavoidable. My cheeks flushed with both heat and indignation. And yet, even in that frustration, hope lingered. The shadow in the footage, however blurred, could be enhanced. Patterns could be tracked. The camera at the gate had recorded more than a simple blink. Perhaps the neighborhood's casual oversight was my advantage. After the meeting, Karen sauntered toward the board members, a tray of lemonade in hand. She moved with a casual grace, offering each glass with a practiced smile. I followed at a distance, hands shoved deep in pockets, chest tightening with indignation. She paused at the treasurer, murmuring something that made him nod and chuckle lightly. When she finally reached me, her smile didn't falter. "Wouldn't you like some lemonade, Wallace?" she asked, voice honeyed pitch perfectly balanced between neighborly and teasing. My stomach tightened, a familiar mix of frustration and reluctant admiration for her social finesse. The pool water shimmered under the setting sun, cicadas buzzing like distant machinery, and I realized the entire neighborhood was watching, judging, recording in their own subtle ways. Each whisper, each sideways glance reinforced the fragile boundaries I had to navigate. Karen's offer of lemonade wasn't just civility. It was a claim of dominance, a reminder that the balance of perception in this cul-de-sac was still very much in her favor. Walking back to my driveway later, I noticed an unopened Amazon envelope resting neatly on Karen's porch. It gleamed in the sun, untouched, strangely clean. That single detail gnawed at me, a reminder that appearances could mask reality. Had she really taken my package last year? Or was this just another test of my patience? My mind cataloged the possibilities like case files on a desk, timing opportunity, subtle movements caught on the camera. Every angle mattered. I returned home, the hum of the city blending with the cicadas outside my window. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to focus on patterns rather than personalities. The evidence was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and that I reminded myself was enough to start planning the next move. Even in a neighborhood where rumors spread faster than newsletters and every gesture carried hidden meaning, the truth could still be pieced together one frame at a time. That night, as I shut the door and leaned against the cool frame, I allowed myself a brief exhale. Helpless anger still simmered, but the shadow on the gate's footage offered the tiniest spark of hope. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Outside, the cicadas continued their chorus, indifferent to HOA politics or missing deliveries, but within that persistent hum, I heard the cadence of opportunity, a rhythm that could not be ignored. In the crisp October morning of 2019, I found myself sliding into a cracked vinyl booth at a roadside diner off Route 101, more relieved to escape the HOA chaos than for the greasy comfort food. The scent of burnt coffee mingled with fried bacon curling around me like a warm, indifferent blanket. It was here, among the hum of old neon signs and the quiet clatter of dishes, that I found more hope than any HOA meeting had ever offered. I muttered under my breath, recounting the disappearance of yet another package, wondering if I was imagining patterns or simply losing touch with reason. Raymond Cole, sitting in the adjacent booth, cocked an eyebrow. His eyes, a sharp gray, caught mine, and he leaned slightly as if inviting confession without intrusion. 2 blocks over from my house, he'd been a postal inspector before retirement, now a neighbor with sardonic humor and the uncanny ability to cut through pretense. "Stolen again?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly with amusement. He nudged a battered leather satchel with his elbow. Dog-eared USPS manuals peeked from the flap corners, softened by years of reference. I nodded, hesitant. The world felt heavy around me, each interaction a tightrope between embarrassment and outrage. Raymond didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he listened. And that small acknowledgement, the absence of judgment, was a balm. As the waitress refilled my coffee, sliding the mug along the formica with a soft clink, Raymond leaned back and explained in quiet, deliberate tones the jurisdiction of the USPS. Tampering with mail. "That's federal," he said, tapping a grease-smudged badge he kept folded in the satchel. "Doesn't matter if your neighbor thinks they can play casual thief. It's not casual in the eyes of the law." The words felt distant, yet grounding. I could almost see the layers of bureaucracy, the invisible net of rules that, if approached correctly, could be my shield. He didn't hand me a blueprint for victory, but he hinted at strategy, patience, layered proof, methodical documentation. Not just suspicion, not just rage, but hard evidence collected carefully over time. Each tip he offered felt like another brick in the foundation of a plan I thought I had lost the skills to build. His voice, a mix of humor and rigor, cut through the haze of frustration I'd carried for 2 years. I sipped the bitter coffee, trying to commit every inflection, every pause to memory. Raymond illustrated scenarios, the importance of noting the time a package is delivered, comparing that against the security footage, keeping receipts, even photographing the mailbox exterior after each interaction. He drew crude sketches on a scrap napkin, arrows pointing from the gate camera to the street annotations like shadow timing and potential entry. It was the first structured plan I'd held in my hands since the first stolen delivery. The micro-climax hit subtly. As Raymond handed me a crumpled coffee receipt smeared faintly with ketchup from an earlier order, he said, "Treat this like a contract, Brant. Every little record counts." I gripped it tightly, the paper rough against my fingers, a tactile affirmation of agency. I realized then that confidence wasn't the absence of fear, it was the quiet assertion that I had tools, allies, and a path forward. We lingered, speaking little more about the neighborhood gossip and my litany of minor grievances. Raymond's humor peppered the conversation, a comment about Karen's penchant for perfectly aligned hedges, a quip about HOA newsletter typography. Small observations that reminded me I wasn't alone in noticing these details. The waitress watched expression-neutral filling mugs with the precision of someone accustomed to daily rituals and unspoken dynamics. I left the diner with a plan sketched in my mind, a stack of notes stuffed into my jacket pocket, and a sense of cautious optimism. The road home felt lighter, the desert air cooler as I walked past the scrubby trees lining the cul-de-sac. Yet, even in that buoyant mood, the shadow of uncertainty clung to me. The neighborhood's vigilance or complicity remained opaque, and I knew a single misstep could set me back months. Back home, I unpacked the small batch of packages that had finally arrived the previous day. I made mental notes, weight, shape, condition, position, in the mailbox. Each action was methodical, almost ritualistic, the sort of repetition that grounded a mind prone to frustration. And yet, the next morning as I stepped onto the driveway, my stomach sank. One package, the one I had earmarked for careful tracking, had vanished. I stared at the empty space where it should have rested, gripping the edge of the mailbox. My pulse accelerated, a mixture of exasperation and determination. Raymond's words echoed in my head, layered proof, not speculation. I reminded myself that every plan has a setback, but setbacks didn't erase strategy, they refined it. I traced the outline of the missing box in my mind, imagining the security footage. I hadn't yet analyzed the timestamps I needed to cross-reference. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control. The anger and helplessness of previous HOA meetings were still there simmering, but they were tempered by action. I began cataloging potential witnesses, noting routines of neighbors, estimating times of mailbox use. The shadow of Karen's smirk, the casual dominance she wielded over the cul-de-sac, no longer seemed insurmountable. That night, as the desert chill seeped through the sliding glass doors, I reviewed the notes from the diner once more. Raymond's advice wasn't a map to immediate victory, it was a compass. Each layer of documentation, each observation, was a step toward reclaiming agency. Confidence, fragile but real, settled over me like a thin blanket against the creeping anxiety. And somewhere in the mix of inked receipts, grease-stained badges, and quiet diner booths, I realized the fight was no longer about indignation alone. It was about demonstrating that patience, preparation, and careful observation could bend the scales of justice, however slowly, against the neighborhood dynamics I had long underestimated. I set the last receipt on the counter, the faint ketchup stain catching the lamplight, and allowed myself a small nod. Tomorrow would be another round, another attempt to balance the ledger, and though one package had already disappeared, I felt something I hadn't in years. The first flicker of a counter-move, deliberate and grounded in method rather than fury. By mid-2020, my mailbox wasn't mine anymore, or at least that's how Karen framed it. She strolled past my lawn one morning, espresso in hand, a satisfied smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "Oh, property." "You know," she said, as if the words were a declaration of universal truth. I clenched the envelope in my hand, a certified letter from the HOA, edges crisp and embossed with authority, and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The HOA had scheduled a mailbox compliance review listed neatly on the agenda for that August's meeting. Folding chairs were set 6 feet apart across the common lawn, pandemic protocol, they called it. Sun beat down on the manicured grass, bringing out the metallic glare of the clipboards and the sharp crease in every HOA board member's expression. The smell of fresh-cut grass mingled with something faintly medicinal, hand sanitizer bottles stationed at each chair. Karen predictably arrived early. Her eyes glinted under the sun, triumphant. She whispered to a nearby neighbor who barely stifled a laugh. I could feel the weight of dozens of stares, neighbors reading the board minutes, hearing the scripted accusations that portrayed me as hostile, unreasonable, uncooperative. I gripped the certified letter so tightly that the paper creased under my fingers. The HOA president read the minutes with cold efficiency, voice flat, almost rehearsed mailbox at 4528 cul-de-sac, non-compliant with Section 3.2 of Covenants and Bylaws. A few nods from board members, then silence. Everyone seemed eager to maintain distance while still participating in the subtle theater of shame. Later that evening, I discovered the mailbox. Karen had helped highlight the violation with a splash of red paint applied overnight. The color was vivid, glossy, and dripping a public declaration of my alleged defiance. I walked around it, phone in hand, capturing every detail, the way the red streaks ran unevenly, pooling at the edges like open wounds. A faint chemical odor clung to the air, stinging my nostrils. In the distance, the drone of a mower provided a low, indifferent background hum, emphasizing the absurdity of the spectacle. Neighbors whispered as I photographed, some averting their eyes, others pretending to read their phones while casting glances at the scene. The HOA minutes had already labeled me as difficult. Now the physical marker my mailbox was a vivid testament to that branding. My pulse thudded, a mix of humiliation and simmering frustration. Every click of the camera phone felt like a small act of defiance, a record for future reference, a counterweight to the narrative being written about me. I replayed the board's scripted words in my mind. Non-compliant, Section 3.2, Final Notice, Next Steps. Each phrase echoed as though amplified by the painted mailbox. Karen's smirk caught in my peripheral vision added insult to injury. The painting wasn't just a violation of decorum, it was a symbol, and I recognized it immediately as prop number 2, the damaged stage of a longer arc. Micro-climax arrived quietly without dramatic gestures. I crouched at dawn the next day, camera poised, capturing the paint glistening under the first sun. Drops clung to the metal, trembling in the light breeze, each one a small testament to the collective judgment of my neighbors and the bureaucratic machinery that Karen wielded with such precision. I took multiple angles close-ups of drips, wider shots showing my cul-de-sac neighbors' homes in the background. Each image was a record, a proof, a claim that the story wasn't just in minutes or whispers, it was tangible, visible, undeniable. By evening, my inbox pinged with the HOA's latest communication final warning. Next step, fine and lean. The subject line alone made my stomach twist. It was the procedural equivalent of a slap across the face, formal and detached, yet laden with threat. I stared at the message, the words harsh against the soft glow of my desk lamp, and felt the isolation settle in deeper. The neighborhood, my community, seemed suddenly populated with ghosts. People who had once smiled and waved now became observers, participants only in the official record of my supposed transgression. I sat back, exhaling slowly, taking in the muted sounds of evening, the distant drone of the mower finishing its route, a dog barking somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, the subtle creak of my porch swing. The scent of paint still lingered faintly, clinging to my clothes and hair. The mailbox, red and accusatory, gleamed under the street lamp. My first instinct was frustration, then a flicker of anger, not the reckless kind, but the simmering methodical type that feeds action rather than despair. The HOA artifacts had multiplied certified letter painted mailbox as physical evidence of harassment, formal meeting minutes documenting my non-compliance. Each one reinforced the stakes. I realized that my strategy couldn't be reactionary anymore. It needed to anticipate, collect, and formalize. Raymond's advice echoed in my mind, layered proof, not speculation. Every photo, every note, every time-stamped interaction became a building block in the structure of defense I was slowly assembling. That night, I mapped it all on paper, scribbling lines from the mailbox to the HOA office, marking dates of emails, letters, and meetings. Prop number 2 was no longer just an object of humiliation, it was evidence, and evidence was power. I felt a tentative sense of agency return, even as the nicks of isolation cut at my confidence. Karen's smile, the whispered judgments of neighbors, and the cold detachment of the board couldn't erase the fact that I now had something tangible, something I could point to and say, this is real, this is documented, this is ours to argue, and yet the flicker of unease persisted. The HOA's warning loomed like a low cloud threatening fines and liens, and the painted mailbox would remain a daily reminder of vulnerability until action was taken. I could feel the weight of every eye, real or imagined, as I returned to my porch. I breathed in the faint scent of paint, exhaled slowly, and promised myself I would not let the shame dictate my response. The next step had to be calculated, deliberate, measured. As the streetlights blinked on and the evening drew long shadows across the lawn, I checked my phone one last time. The HOA email glared back at me, final and immovable, but somewhere under the red paint and the procedural threats I could see a glimmer of opportunity, a path to reclaim not just the mailbox, but the narrative of my own life within the cul-de-sac. The night was quiet, the hum of suburbia indifferent, and I felt the first real spark of resolve since the painted mailbox had transformed my frustration into a plan. By mid-2020, my mailbox wasn't mine anymore, or at least that's how Karen framed it. She strolled past my lawn one morning, espresso in hand, a satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. HOA property, you know, she said, as if her words carried the weight of law. I held a certified letter from the HOA, edges crisp and embossed with authority, and felt that tightening in my chest, the familiar mix of irritation and disbelief. The HOA had scheduled a mailbox compliance review, clearly listed on the agenda for that August's meeting. Folding chairs were arranged 6 feet apart across the common lawn, pandemic protocol, they called it. Sun glinted off clipboards, casting tiny shadows on the manicured grass. The faint antiseptic tang of hand sanitizer hovered in the air, mingling with the sharper scent of freshly cut grass. Karen arrived early naturally. She whispered to a neighbor who barely stifled a laugh. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, assessing, judging, cataloging my reactions. The HOA president read the scripted minutes with cold precision, announcing my mailbox as non-compliant with Section 3.2 of Covenants and Bylaws. A few nods, a quiet shuffle of papers. I clenched the certified letter in my hand, its weight suddenly heavier than usual. After the meeting, I discovered what Karen had done. Overnight, she had splashed my mailbox with red paint. Glossy, dripping streaks ran down the metal like angry veins. It was a public marker of my supposed defiance. I crouched to photograph it, noting the way the sun caught each drop, the faint chemical scent of paint clinging to the air. The distant hum of a mower punctuated the scene, indifferent to my frustration. Neighbors whispered as I worked, pretending to ignore me or pretending to be busy. Some eyes lingered too long. I realized that the HOA minutes had already branded me difficult, and now the mailbox served as a visual reinforcement. Each click of my camera was a small act of resistance, recording what I knew would be denied in words. The mailbox, now prop number 2 in my mental ledger, represented more than mere paint. It marked a shift. My public humiliation had moved from whispers and paperwork to a physical manifestation visible to anyone passing by. I circled it, took close-ups of the dripping paint and wider shots, including the cul-de-sac, capturing the theater in its entirety. Even as I documented, a simmering anger grew not reckless, but methodical. I could almost see the narrative being written around me, difficult, hostile, non-compliant. Later that evening, I replayed the HOA meeting in my mind. Every word of the scripted minutes, every pause, every glance from Karen. Non-compliant, Section 3.2, final notice, next steps. The phrases lingered echoing in the empty rooms of my house. Karen's smirk appeared unbidden, her espresso cup still balanced effortlessly in her hand. The micro-climax of the chapter was subtle. I had evidence, yes, but the stakes felt higher. Every neighbor glance, every whispered judgment, every HOA artifact now carried weight. By nightfall, a new email arrived. Final warning. Next step, fine and lean. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. It was procedural detached, yet threatening, formal, yet personal. I stared at it, feeling the isolation deepen. The neighborhood, once warm and familiar, now seemed populated with shadows, silent witnesses to the official record of my alleged transgression. I took a slow walk around the lawn, letting the faint scent of paint mix with evening air. The mailbox glistened under the street lamp, each droplet a visual accusation. My mind cataloged the artifact's certified letter-painted mailbox agenda item. Together, they were pieces of a puzzle I had to assemble carefully. I remembered Raymond's advice: gather proof-layer evidence, don't rely on suspicion alone. Each photo, each note, each time-stamped interaction became part of that structure. Sitting at my desk later, I mapped it all out, connecting dates of letters, emails, and meetings. The mailbox, once a mundane prop, now symbolized the public humiliation I had endured. Prop number 2 damaged was more than paint. It was evidence, a statement of intent from Karen, and a tangible record for future action. I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Finally, I had something concrete to counter the narrative, a foothold in what had felt like a losing game. Still, the isolation weighed. The HOA's final warning hovered over me, threatening liens and fines. Karen's smirk and the neighbors' subtle judgments were constant reminders of my precarious position. Yet, beneath the frustration, a flicker of resolve emerged. The painted mailbox had forced me into clarity. I needed a measured, deliberate response, one rooted in evidence and patience. As streetlights flickered on and long shadows stretched across the lawn, I checked the email one last time. The HOA's message remained sharp and unyielding, but I felt the first spark of control since the mailbox had been splashed in red. Tomorrow, I would act. The painted mailbox, though a mark of shame, had inadvertently shown me the path forward. It was no longer merely a symbol of what Karen had taken. It was the foundation for reclaiming what was rightfully mine. By winter 2021, the desert nights were long and merciless, and so was the stack of past-due notices on my garage workbench. I counted them again, as if tallying misdeeds in some grim confessional: HOA fines, late fees, medical bills. The red-inked numbers blurred under the dim light of a buzzing bulb, casting jagged shadows over the unopened envelopes. Somewhere outside, the wind skittered across the cul-de-sac, rattling a loose shutter like an impatient neighbor. I leaned back on a folding chair, pill bottle rattling in one hand, letters trembling under the other, and wondered how much more a man could endure before tipping into recklessness. Karen's presence, or at least the sense of it, lingered at the edge of my vision. A shadow crossed the driveway, quick, practiced, and I froze. She was always watching, always calculating like a predator, marking territory invisible to anyone else. The mail, the HOA board, the neighbors' sideways glances, it all funneled into this quiet, cold, almost cinematic tension inside my garage. Raymond's words echoed in my head, layered proof Wallace. Not just suspicion evidence. It was the only compass I had left amid the mounting absurdity of Fine's letters and the occasional grin from Karen at poolside meetings. The moment that pushed me over was mundane in the worst possible way, a medical bill and a fresh HOA fine arriving the same afternoon. I stared at them, the glossy notice of violation pressed against my chest like a fist. The dollar signs mocked me, the bureaucratic precision of the HOA's typeface punctuating every threat. The garage smelled faintly of oil and dust, punctuated by the metallic scent of pill caps clattering onto the concrete floor. My mind spun, but somewhere in the background the smallest spark of purpose flickered. I remembered Raymond's diner advice, etched in his sardonic voice: proof beats fury. Layer it. Keep it tight. Don't act like a fool. It seemed simple yet genius in its restraint. Layered proof. My gaze drifted to the corner where unused packages lay, reminders of past frustrations. And then it hit me, a decoy. A controlled trap that would remain legal, nonviolent, undeniable. Something that Karen couldn't deny without exposing herself. My hands trembled slightly as I rifled through the garage shelves, finding glitter, a ridiculous sparkly mess that would broadcast any meddler's intrusion in plain sight. The plan formed fast, meticulously in the dim glow. I wrapped a small package, securing it with double layers of tape. Each fold, each crease was deliberate, measured. The glitter was tucked inside, subtle but certain to spill upon the slightest interference. I set up the motion sensor camera above the porch, testing angles, adjusting light, making sure shadows wouldn't mask the figure. My pulse raced in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Not adrenaline in the usual sense, but a tense anticipation that bordered on guilt. This was my own home, and yet I felt like a criminal plotting against a neighbor. I rehearsed the scenario in my head while cleaning stray glitter from my fingers, the dust catching in the buzzing garage light like tiny stars. Every step was precise. Leave the package, retreat inside, monitor the alert, capture proof. My own reflection in the garage window watched me with a mixture of incredulity and grim determination. The small bottle of pills rattled again as I shifted, reminding me of fragility, mortality, and the stakes piling higher than any HOA fine could quantify. Finally, I placed the decoy package on the porch, my hand hovering over it for a moment longer than necessary. The night was cold, the streetlights painting long yellow streaks across the asphalt. I exhaled slowly, the weight of the day, the past, and the fine print pressing into my chest. This was it. A calculated risk, a lawful countermeasure, and a chance to reclaim some control without crossing the line Raymond had warned me about. The buzzer of the motion alert pierced the quiet just as I stepped back inside. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, sharp, insistent. Heart pounding, I glanced at the screen and froze. There she was. Karen's silhouette bent over the box, careful, deliberate. The glitter, unseen by her but poised to testify, promised the proof I'd needed. A soft rustle, a faint scrape, and the camera's red light blinked like a pulse, recording every movement in unflinching detail. I sank into a chair, watching the shadows dance on the walls. This small trap, ridiculous and sparkling as it might seem, was more than a prank. It was justice in microcosm. Every red-lettered fine, every whispered accusation, every public smirk was being countered not with anger, but with evidence. My despair had tipped into action, carefully circumscribed, but no less thrilling. The garage smelled faintly of glitter dust, the pill bottles, and the faint, lingering scent of old cardboard, a strangely comforting mix reminding me that I was still here, still observing, still in control. And yet, as the camera's red light continued its unblinking pulse, a gnawing doubt crept in. Had I underestimated her cunning? Was the evidence enough, or would she find a way to spin it against me? The questions didn't matter, not yet. All that mattered was the moment Karen caught in the act, or at least caught by the eyes of a machine that didn't blink, judge, or dismiss. My phone buzzed again, signaling that movement had ended. I swallowed hard, feeling the tension linger in my chest like a held breath, the desert night pressing against the garage walls, silent and vast. The trap was set. The first layer of proof existed shimmering faintly with every glitter speck that might someday become incontrovertible evidence. I sat back exhausted, but a flicker of grim satisfaction warmed the chill. The night stretched before me long and quiet, but for the first time in years I felt a small sense of agency. The HOA clubhouse smelled sharply of lemon polish and faint carpet musk. Folding tables formed a U-shaped projector humming, casting pale light over polished nameplates. I gripped the remote clicker knuckles, white chest thrumming. Years of past due notices, stolen deliveries, and whispered suspicions had led here. Tonight, patience met proof. Karen Halbrook sat opposite, immaculate as ever, her blouse, crisp hair perfect, but her eyes flickered unease breaking through the mask of calm. The HOA president shuffled papers skeptical. Some neighbors exchanged discreet smirks. Others leaned forward, curiosity sharpening. The projector's red light blinked in rhythm with my pulse. Karen tried to speak. "This is slander." "You." I raised a hand, calm. The board asked for evidence. "Allow me." Click. The video flickered on my porch, the decoy package motion alert triggering. Karen bent over the box, hesitation in her shoulders. Then glitter exploded. Sparkling dust clung to her hair, face blouse. Laughter rippled. The HOA president banged the gavel once, struggling to keep order. Glitter shimmered defiantly, testament to patience and lawful cunning. I narrated briefly, motion sensor triggers, timestamps, documented notices. The evidence spoke. Lemon polish mingled with floating glitter, emphasizing absurdity and satisfaction. Karen's composure crumbled. She swiped uselessly at sparkling residue, muttering accusations. Neighbors' expressions shifted, shock, amusement, relief. Even the treasurer, once lecturing me about delivery liability, smirked. Raymond's advice echoed layered proof Wallace. Let the system do the talking. Tonight, it did. The long arc of stolen packages, mailbox paint, whispered gossip had built to this catharsis. Justice, measured and legal, had its moment. Karen stormed out, glitter clinging to her as a mocking reminder. HOA lawyer muttered, "We'll need to amend the minutes." Acknowledgement of what transpired. I sank into my chair, exhaling. Hands relaxed, a small smile. Balance restored quietly but undeniably. Even as Karen's retreat faded, glitter on the polished floor caught the light, a delicate, enduring flourish. Proof, patience, and careful planning had won. By fall 2023, silence on my street felt neutral for the first time, not hostile, not weighted with suspicion. The cool air smelled of hickory smoke and cornbread drifting from grills set up along porches. Flags fluttered gently as neighbors stepped outside, cautious but curious. Tentative smiles replaced wary glances, a quiet acknowledgement that things were shifting. I lingered near the edge of the block party, feeling relief laced with lingering wariness. Years of stolen packages, HOA letters, and public embarrassment had left their mark. Raymond stood nearby, sandpaper in one hand, mailbox brackets in the other, his calm presence steadying. "Ready to reclaim your corner?" he asked, voice lightly teasing. The mailbox loomed like an old wound. Red paint from years past peeked through chipped primer. I hesitated, then took the sandpaper Raymond offered. Neighbors drifted closer. Curiosity softening into participation. A child wandered up shyly, pressing a library flyer into my hand, a small gesture of goodwill, but significant. Raymond guided my hands, showing me how to sand the surface evenly. The rasp of sandpaper over metal echoed faintly, mingling with laughter and chatter. Each stroke erased a fragment of humiliation layer by layer. Primer smoothed over stubborn red stains, reclaiming not just the mailbox, but my sense of place and pride. The act was quiet, almost meditative, yet intensely satisfying. Neighbors offered small apologies. Words carried softly across tables. "Sorry about the trouble back then," one murmured, adjusting a folding chair. Another nodded briefly, recognizing past mistakes. Their gestures, however minor, stitched the community back together layer by layer like the primer on the mailbox. Children darted between tables, laughter spilling into the afternoon. Plates of ribs and cornbread exchanged hands. Conversation gradually returned to everyday topics. Gardening, local library events, weekend, sports, threads of normalcy weaving across the block. The air shifted from cautious to comfortably alive. Raymond remained by my side, offering guidance without imposing. Together, we tightened brackets, aligned the mailbox, and stepped back to admire the work. The once humiliating red stains now hid in the mailbox stood repaired, a subtle but tangible symbol of resilience. Prop symbol number 3 had begun its final transformation, a quiet testament to lawfulness, patience, and endurance. The block party carried on around us, and I noticed tentative nods from neighbors I hadn't seen speak to me in years. Small gestures, a wave, a smile, a shared joke signaled that balance had returned to our little cul-de-sac. The street felt mine again, not because it had changed, but because the social equilibrium had shifted. As I applied a final coat of primer, my phone pinged. The HOA announcement blinked on the screen. Bylaw revisions would be voted on next spring. Timing felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, signaling procedural closure to the lingering chaos. I exhaled, sensing that the community had survived and was now quietly healing. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. I stepped back from the mailbox, hands smudged with primer chest lighter than it had been in years. The rasp of sandpaper, the smell of hickory smoke, and the soft laughter of neighbors merged into a comforting rhythm. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel that equilibrium had returned not perfect, but steady, human, and promising. Spring 2024 came with a warmth that felt almost unreal. The common lawn shone under bright sun-folding chairs lined in a neat U-shape. Flags swayed lightly from porches. Children's laughter spilled around the small wooden structure at the end of the mailbox row. It was dedication day for the neighborhood free library, and the air smelled of fresh paint glue and cut grass. I carried the first book to shelve a battered paperback Raymond had safeguarded since our diner talk years earlier. Its creased spine, its faint coffee stains felt like proof of continuity, a bridge from chaos toward calm. Karen was absent, rumored to have moved away for good. No whispers, no smirks. Just space, finally, for something different. Neighbors gathered with hesitant smiles. Some leaned on canes, others clutched lemonade cups. The children were restless, circling the new structure. I noticed their joy more than the adults' reserve. The mailbox stood beside it, restored smooth white paint gleaming. A small brass plaque read, "Community Matters." I ran a thumb over the letters, cool and solid. Years ago, red paint had scarred it. Now it stood unblemished. Raymond nodded from a folding chair, sandpaper dust still clinging faintly to his shirt. He had insisted on helping with the repairs, and I was grateful. His steady presence, his patience through every stage anchored me. When the HOA refund had been announced, the suggestion to fund a free library came quickly. To me, it felt symbolic, money once taken unjustly, redirected toward shared trust. What better place than near the mailbox station, the site of so much pettiness and loss? I opened Raymond's book and began to read aloud. My voice trembled at first, but steadied with rhythm. The words ordinary on paper seemed weighted with new meaning here. I caught the children listening, one girl's head tilted in focus, a boy clutching a picture book under his arm. A few neighbors leaned closer, expressions softening. Finishing the passage, I slid the paperback onto the top shelf. The wood was still faintly sticky from drying varnish. A round of gentle clapping followed, small, polite, but real. I breathed in the moment, the sound of applause blending with a child's giggle and the distant hum of lawn sprinklers. I reached for the mailbox door, opening and closing it once. The soft metallic click echoed more deeply than expected, a punctuation mark to years of strain. Where once the box symbolized intrusion and theft, it now stood as a repaired vessel of exchange letters, notices, maybe even kindnesses. Neighbors began chatting more freely. Gardening tips swapped hands. Someone promised extra ribs left from last night's cookout. A woman I had clashed with years earlier pressed a cup of lemonade into my palm without a word. Small gestures, but enough. Raymond joined me at the mailbox, tapping the plaque once with his knuckle. "Solid," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to answer immediately. My throat tightened with the weight of everything unsaid, the battles fought, the humiliation endured, the victories secured through patience, not rage. The children crowded the library, pulling books, returning them, giggling at pictures. The sight nearly undid me. I thought back to notices taped to my door, to red paint bleeding across metal, to my heart pounding as I set a glitter trap in desperation. All of that felt distant, not erased but reframed, transformed into proof that persistence could outlast cruelty. I stood with neighbors, listening to the chatter ripple. No gavel banged, no accusations hung in the air. Instead, there was barbecue smoke from a grill down the block, the creak of lawn chairs shifting, the scrape of chalk on pavement as children drew flowers and suns. The sun caught the brass plaque again, sending a small gleam across the grass. I let it rest there, a reminder, a marker. Community wasn't perfect, but it was possible. I stayed until the crowd thinned. Children still lingered, swapping books. The mailbox door shut one last time with its quiet click, and I felt something inside me settle. Closure, but also continuity. Years of humiliation fines and suspicion distilled into one truth: endurance mattered. The lawn emptied. I looked back once more, the library standing sturdy, the mailbox beside it. Symbols healed. Trust fragile but real, rooted again. Spring breeze stirs the lawn. The HOA gate is silent hickory smoke and fresh paint mingling with children's laughter around the new library. I place the resoldered ring box back on the shelf, its light a quiet reminder that wounds can heal. The small dedication pulls neighbors closer, gestures simple but full of meaning. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. We didn't win by shouting, we followed the rules, stayed patient and connected. If your street has gone quiet under piles of notices, open a door with a neighbor and see how far a collective voice can reach.